If you're looking to sell your home in 2026, there's a lot of things that you can do to make sure that the process goes smoothly. In this video, I'm going to be giving you some practical advice, and I'm also going to be talking a little bit about the state of affairs in terms of where the market is, because that's what's going to determine whether or not the advice I'm giving is actually relevant to your specific situation. And the truth is that this advice is going to vary from market to market. And if you want to know what the state of affairs is for your specific market, I make regularly updated videos about the housing market and the state of affairs in different markets. And I cover markets like Tampa, Florida, Las Vegas, Southern California, Northern California, the West Coast, the East Coast, South Florida, as well as Texas and a lot of other markets in the Midwest. And the truth is that each of these markets is going to have obviously a little bit different conditions, with some being a much stronger buyer's market. But in general, across the nation right now, we're in a pretty solid buyer's market. And in this video, we'll be going over the reasons that we're in a buyer's market and how you can approach this to make sure that you get your home sold. And if you can't get your home sold for a value that you want or price that you actually need in order to sell because of loan constraints or whatever the reason might be, I'll talk about some other alternatives and options that you can look at if now isn't the best time for you to sell. So first off, let's just talk about the general state of affairs and where the market is in 2026. Now, as I said earlier, generally speaking, we are in a buyer's market. Again, this is going to vary by region, but it's even within each region, it's going to vary substantially by zip code, because each zip code has its own market, and some zip codes have substantially higher inventory than others, and so that's going to drastically affect how things move. So in a buyer's market, what that typically means is sellers are making more concessions. And so if you're basing your expectations for selling in 2026 based on the experience that a neighbor had in 2021 or even 2022 before things topped and started to come down, you might be in for a rude awakening when you realize that your house is either worth less than what you thought, or the market is not as favorable for sellers because the days of having 3 or 4 offers over asking within a few days of something hitting the market are just not realistic in today's market. For example, in my market in Denver, Colorado, during the pandemic, we had record low inventory where we might have had 2,000 to 3,000 homes on the market in any given month. But now that has reversed and we have the highest inventory on market in the history of Denver ever. And so the fact that we have such a glut of inventory in most markets right now, and we have a glut of inventory because sellers that were not aggressive in their pricing in 2022 ended up relisting in 2023, and they made the same mistake again, and they didn't list at an aggressive price, and so they didn't sell. And so now those are back on the market in 2024. And this is just a repeating theme that we're seeing. And if you're wondering whether or not we're going to see a bubble or if we're in the middle of a bubble like we had in 2008, in my opinion, we are not. And the reason is because in 2008, the bubble we were dealing with was because people were in loans that were variable rate loans. And so they were forced to sell because they could no longer afford the property because their mortgage might have gone from $2,000 a month to $4,000 a month. And although we're having similar experiences in a lot of markets like Florida because of insurance going sky high in my particular home market, that situation is also true because fire insurance has gotten more expensive in the mountains. But the truth is that homes are still selling if they're priced appropriately and people can afford them, especially because interest rates have just ticked under 6% for the first time since the pandemic. And that, coupled with the fact that homes on average in most markets are down 10 to 15% from their peak, which was May of 2022, basically across the nation, has made it so that homes are starting to get affordable again for the first time in a while. So this is good news for you as a seller, unless you're trying to sell your home for what it was worth in 2021. And if that's the case for you and you can't sell it for less than what it was worth in 2022 or 2023, just because maybe that's when you bought it, I'll talk about some other options and how you can address that if you actually need to move and there's a reason you need to get out of your house and you need to sell. But the bottom line is that right now the market's changed a little bit. And so homes that are appropriately priced are the ones that we're seeing going under contract and having offers quickly because buyers know that the sellers are ready to sell, and it's evident by the price. Now, one of the best things that you can do in a market like this is if you know that you're going to sell in the next 3 months or 6 months, is you can start getting it ready to sell by fixing any defects or discrepancies that might come up during an inspection. Now, the truth is home inspectors are notorious for nitpicking every little thing, and an experienced buyer will know this when they're looking at the home, and so they take the inspection report with a grain of salt. However, if there's any major defects, things like sewer lines, HVAC equipment that's over 20 years old or close to the end of its life, which is about 20 years in most cases, with the exception being certain types of heating and air conditioning equipment, or if you have major issues like an electrical panel that's a fire hazard, like a Federal Pacific Electric panel, for example, those are the things that you're going to want to be on the lookout for and get addressed now, because those can be major things, and a lender will not lend on a home that has a bad sewer line or has HVAC that doesn't work or that has a panel that is a hazard and won't pass inspection. Is that one of the things we'll often advise sellers to do when they're in the market to sell is that they go out and get a home inspector to do a walkthrough and do an inspection, or a moderate or do a lighter version version of an inspection before they actually go to list. So that way they know about any random leaky faucets or any random things that might be nitpicked that you can either do yourself or you can have done for cheap by a handyman. So that way when you go into listing the property and you have someone put in an offer and you go under contract, you can provide them with this information and they will know that a lot of these situations will have been rectified. Chances are they're going to still want to get their own inspection, but the bottom line is that you'll have addressed any glaring defects before the property gets listed, so that way there's no major surprises. What if you can't afford to do any of the major repairs or even minor repairs and you really need to sell? It's not a big deal. You can still list without doing that. Just make sure that you're comfortable pricing it appropriately to account for this, and make sure that your agent is familiar with properties in the area, what the price per square foot is. And if your property is one that's in disarray or needs some repairs, you know to price it accordingly on the lower end of the spectrum in terms of price per square feet, so that way, number one, you actually get some attention and action and offers on the property. And number two, the last thing you want to do is have a property that is sitting, that is priced over what nicer properties are actually selling for in your area. And this is a common thing that, again, sellers who are not familiar with the market or sellers who have a realtor that they hire because that realtor is telling them what they want to hear, and basically that they can get a price that is a pie in the sky number that is not realistic. Just because interest rates are coming down does not mean that housing prices are going to go up again. In fact, a lot of people right now, especially buyers, are checked out from the housing market because things are still generally considered unaffordable, because the conjunction of higher prices with high interest rates has made it so that affordability is a lot lower than it was 4 or 5 years ago. And as a result, a lot of people are waiting for prices to come down a little bit lower than they probably ever will, because they just have unrealistic expectations about what they should be able to buy a home for. And they don't understand that the federal government just literally printed trillions of dollars in the form of stimulus checks that created everything asset bubble, which is why everything got so expensive in the first place. It's not because anything changed in the actual valuations of these properties. It's just that a lot of stimulus and money went out into the economy and inflated all asset prices, including things like the S&P 500, the stock market, silver, gold, and as well as Bitcoin. So let's say you have an appropriately priced home, but you want to know what are some of the things that you can do to make sure that it sells and sells quickly. If your kitchen is in disarray and you need a new kitchen, do you go out and replace the kitchen? No, that would be something that you just take account for in the price of the home. So that way it's priced appropriately, because there's going to be a prettier home in your neighborhood that has a nice kitchen. And if you're not priced below that, you're not going to give people something to think about. Obviously, they're going to want to go with the nicer house with the nicer kitchen. However, if you're wanting to make a few updates to make your house showroom ready, so to speak, and ready to list, there's a few things you can do that will add curb appeal as well as help the home show better when people are doing a walkthrough. Now, notoriously in real estate, one of the easiest ways to improve the saleability of any property is simply carpet and paint. And the reason is because carpet and paint are two very cheap things you can get done. A room, for example, can typically be painted for a couple $100. Now, painting the entire exterior of your house, that's another story. But small finishing touches on the exterior for curb appeal, like changing the numbers on your building to a more modern look or appeal, or making sure there's no weeds and that the landscaping is clean so there's a nice, tidy presentation when people pull up to the house, are all things that can go a very long way, adding to the perceived value of the house. It's just the basics of making sure that even if your home isn't the nicest home on the block, it presents well and shows well. And if you do happen to have one of the nicest homes on the block, just keep in mind that if you price your home appropriately right now, it is likely to sell and go under contract a lot quicker, because of the fact that you have all the improvements and all the upgrades that people are looking for, because they have so much inventory to choose from. That doesn't mean you're going to command a premium that's more than what it was worth, like I said, 3 or 4 years ago, but it does mean that it will be easier to sell your home than one of the other homes that just blends in with the rest of the homes for sale in the market that may or may not have the same curb appeal that yours does. And then the last and final thing I want to touch on is a question that you have to ask yourself, and it's how motivated are you to sell? Because the truth is if you're wanting to sell your home, but you don't really need to move, and so you're more looking to get a premium for your home, you can definitely list it and see where it goes. But because right now interest rates are still coming down and buyers are still just slowly starting to come back into the market, you might not get the result you're looking for, especially if you're trying to get a premium for your home. But if your home isn't selling, one of the other options that a lot of people will look to is renting it out. Rents, however, have softened as a result of this. So just keep in mind, if you've been in your home for 5+ years, chances are you're in a good position to rent out your home and either cash flow that property or at a minimum be able to cover the mortgage after all expenses, including your property management. And this will at least allow you to get out from the burden of that house if you need to sell because you're trying to move or go to a new state, and then you can turn around and sell your home when market conditions are more favorable. But generally speaking, homes are getting leased right now. Homes are always getting rented. But the key is when you're talking to realtors in your area, just make sure that they're familiar with your specific situation as well as your specific market so that they know how to price your home appropriately to get it accomplished. And if you happen to be in one of the markets I'm in, like Denver or Southern California, there's a link in the description on how you can work with me. And in the description, I talk about how that can benefit a charity of your choosing just by deciding to list with me. And as mentioned earlier, there's a video popping up on the screen right now with a deep dive on housing market data in several specific markets. So make sure you check that out if you haven't done so already, and we'll catch you on the next one. Peace.